Well, you may have, hopefully have discovered the little blue sheet in your worship guide. And what can I say? Former kindergarten teacher, you end up with ABCs. But as I read this passage to prepare to preach it this week, I kept going, wait a minute, Paul, wait. I've got this command and we're moving on to the next one. And if you've read through this passage in Romans, you know it is rapid fire, one command after the next of how to live this life Christ has given us. And I started thinking about how we might approach it. Like I said, teacher in me ended up with these ABCs. So I went back through, and we are indeed covering every single one of the commands with these ABCs. So instead of, if you'll indulge me, us reading these scriptures, I assure you, these are the scriptures. As you can see, the verses are there. And I'm just going to say A, and then I'm going to read with you that command. And I think we'll just make our way right through it. Are you with me? Let's do it. A, associate with the lowly. B, bless those who persecute you. C, contribute to the needs of the saints. And that means our fellow Christians. D, do not be overcome by evil. E, endure tribulation with patience. F, feed the hungry, even your enemies. G, glow with the Spirit. H, hate evil. I, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live in peace with all. J, join with others in their rejoicing. K, keep holding on to what is good. L, love others genuinely. M, make people feel welcome. N, never avenge yourself. O, outdo one another in showing honor. P, pray constantly. Q, quit being haughty and conceited. R, rejoice in your hope. S, show brotherly affection. T, take thought of what is noble in the sight of all. U, undo evil by doing good. V, vengeance should be left to God. W, weep with those who weep. X, exhibit care for your enemy's needs. It may change them. X is always so hard, right? Y, yield your rights for the sake of harmony. And Z, zealously serve the Lord. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word.
Protected
you so much. I am always so blessed with our music, all of our music, every Sunday. Thank you so much. Today, thinking about those ABCs. We live in what some have called the millennium, and they would maintain that social media has made the focus, at least in part, more on the individual than it ever has been before. I don't know about that, and I don't know about the millennium, but I would say that that's pretty well been true for as long as humans have been around. That we look at the very first humans that we're told about in Genesis and how they had everything. They had everything, and they walked in unbroken fellowship with their Creator. What must that have been, to walk in the cool of the garden with the Lord? How could they have thought that there was anything more that they could be lacking? But there was that one tree, and there was that one choice, and a spiritual enemy sowed doubt. Well, you know, he does love you, but I think he's holding out on you. And so they turned from that trust and that beautiful relationship and found a loss incalculable in doing that. I've been thinking about that millennium idea and selfishness, and of all things, it led me to think about a TV show that Keith and I have fairly religiously watched called Survivor. Do we have any Survivor folks out there? But sometimes I felt guilty watching it because I thought, you know, these souls, what are they doing? They're all pitted against each other, you know, the outwit, outplay, outlast. And some pretty horrible things have happened. If you have watched it, you know the kind of things. But I think the very worst act of selfishness I ever saw, and please forgive me if anybody knows this, because he was only in Greensboro. Did you see the episode where the young man lied that his grandmother died so that he could stay on the show, basically, that they would have pity for him and they wouldn't vote him off? Yeah, and then at the final show, you know, the big reveal when you find out who won and all that, his grandmother was sitting right out there in the audience. And the host went out there and said, well, what'd you think about being dead during the show? You know, what did you think about that? And she was not happy, to say the least. She was not happy. Of course, he did not win. But that show is all about pushing people aside and plotting and scheming and getting what you can and heading for that $1 million. Well, Paul's slogan would not be, first of all, a show called Survivor. It would be called Overcomer. And he would say the motto is outgive, outsacrifice, outlove. Paul, like his master, is calling us to a love that can't be compared to anything that we might call love in our day-to-day, you know, sort of cultural way of defining it. No, this is a real deal kind of love. Again, the outgive, the outsacrifice, the outlast kind of love. Verses 9 through 13 in the scriptures, the passage today, they talk about how we're to love one another, our fellow Christians, with that kind of love. But then in verses 14 to 21, you really dig in and you find out how we're to love those who are opposed to us, who don't love us, who are our enemies. You know, if Paul were to speak to us today, he would say, I believe, too many churches are too concerned with their personal assets, with having the biggest budget around, with having the biggest sanctuary around, with having the most beautiful sanctuary around, to having the most active members, to having the most wonderful handbell choir or church choir or whatever, the most, the best. And he would say, you know what you really want to excel in? You want to be the best at loving people. That's what you want your reputation to be. When somebody walks in that door, they're going to be loved, really loved. People are going to pay attention to them. They're going to talk to them. They're going to spend some time with them, and they're going to make them feel genuinely welcome. And I just have told you before, I'll tell you again, from a personal standpoint, that's you. That's written all over you. But Paul today, he wants to challenge us, and so I need the challenge. I trust you do too. What does that genuine love look like? What does it look like? Well, it's radically different from most anything we're going to see that the world would call love. It's going to take a complete renewing of our minds, as we've spent time thinking about that with Paul in our past couple of weeks, a complete renewing of our mind, changing our perspective, helping us to really see people and not just the behavior they're exhibiting at that moment or the words that they might have just said. Helping us to remember that the Lord sees us that way. The Lord sees us as what we can be and what we will be if we trust him, and not just where we are and who we are at this present moment. It will take a complete transformation, our active cooperation and participation in that transformation, our allowing that to happen, that mind change and that heart change. It will take giving over our lives and our rights to God, as we remember from, I believe, last week, that we are not our own. We have been bought with a price. And so Jesus says, if you are mine, you have a cross to carry. And that cross is that you recognize that you're not your own anymore. Your life, as you held rights to it, no more. Now you're mine. You're mine. And it will involve then not only what we believe. This isn't a faith that we just do a head thing with. It's not just a believing here, but it's a believing here with our hands, with our feet, with our choices, with our life and our breath, sometimes moment to moment. Someone has said this incredible quote. Wouldn't it be great if when people heard that you and I were Christians, instead of saying, oh, so you don't drink, they'd say, oh, so you're not stuck up or vengeful. And wouldn't it be even better if the first things that came to their minds were things like love and peace and patience and perseverance, compassion and hospitality? Wouldn't it be great if we were known more for what we stand for than what we stand against? The reign of God will be a lot closer to being fulfilled when the church is known for the joyous and life-giving things it does and the divisive and destructive things it abstains from, instead of the other way around. Paul, his ABCs, they're all about that kind of joyous and life-giving way to live. The life in the upside-down kingdom. But of course, before he ever gave these words, his master gave them in many scenarios. And one of them that we really think of is that Sermon on the Mountain and the Beatitudes. You know, Paul, a major theme in this passage is to do good, not evil. And remember that Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And he says that we should do with kindness, not vengeance. And Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And Paul says we should do in peace whatever we do, not with wrath. And we know Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And we should do with nobility, not with a low-mindedness. And remember that Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And Paul says we should do with humility, not pridefulness. And remember that Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And Paul says we should do to lift up others, not to lift up self. And remember what Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And finally, Paul says we should do enthusiastically, not apathetically. And we remember what Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn." And now why would that compare? Because mourning our own sin, mourning the pain in the world, thereby seeking to bring joy and lift up those who mourn themselves. But all these things, whether it is Paul's ABCs or Jesus' Beatitudes or all of his other teachings to us, we cannot do without the Lord in us to do it, and we will not do it unless we yield ourselves to him in his power to do for us and in us and through us what we can never do ourselves. I think of 3 stories too. The prodigal son, the ultimate, the love of a father for his child, the love of our Father for us. Whether we're that older child in the house, crossing our arms and saying, "You favor him," or whether we're that younger child off and doing our own thing, far from the Father's love. Or maybe it's the Good Samaritan, another great parable of Jesus. Love for the stranger, love for the enemy. That's what's in that story. Or the greatest one we have, the crucifixion account. Love for the sinner, love for the enemy, love for the world, love for you and me. Well, I'm going to end our time in this message, with a few stories of my own. They're not as grand as these that I've listed, but they mean so much to me. So I share them with you, and I hope they bless you. I pray they do. I was once in a church where I became good friends with someone, a man whose wife had left him for someone else's husband in the church. And so they took off, and the man was left to raise his 3 small children, and the abandoned wife also had children to raise. A number of years passed, and the 2 spouses that had left their spouses and married each other came back to that church to join it. Wow. What would you do? I was not there for most of this story, but I saw what happened when that couple came back. And I saw how that church received them sincerely, genuinely, warmly. They truly loved with the forgiveness of Jesus Christ, and it was a sight to see. And those folks found grace there, and they dug in and they served. And there was peace with those ex-spouses, as you could imagine, where that never probably could have happened. But it did happen. That was a church genuinely showing uncommon hope, uncommon peacemaking, uncommon love. Another story. I told you a while back, and you may remember, the story of a young man who knew in his marriage got in trouble with the law in a big way. He was attempting the rape of a prostitute. He had a gun. He was put in prison for a good many years. His wife decided to stay with him. That in itself was a testament to the love of God and belief in a person, hope. Well, after many years, 8 years, I believe, he came back to that same church who knew everything, knew what his wife had gone through in his absence, knew what he had done, knew all of it. And I wondered, what will happen when he comes in the door? And do you know what they did? They invited him to share his thanksgiving to the church, his love for the church, his appreciation for the letters, his appreciation for the love, his appreciation for their forgiveness, and how it had saved him, how he found the love of God in that. It was amazing. And he continued to serve, to love, to trust, to become part of the family again. In fact, he never really left it because people kept him in their hearts despite the horror of what he'd done. Now that's the love of Christ. Here's another one. A few years ago, several actually, I took a youth group on a camping trip. This is goodness, 20 years ago, maybe more. And unfortunately, some of the kids, in their free time, they found this shack way out in the woods. And the shack was pitiful, but it could still be locked up, and inside were all of these cases of soft drinks that the park replenished their machines with that were in the park. Well, they broke in there. They got those cans and they started taking out light fixtures and windows and rotten parts of the wall and had a free-for-all in there. And then a couple of them stole drinks. And I had no idea that any of this was going on until they were discovered the next day by the park police. And it was horrendous. And I thought, what will become of us when the church knows? What would you do? Well, two of the young men came forward in the Sunday service, and they told everybody what they did. Wow. And then the others admitted as well. And then all of us, parents, youth, offending youth, as many as could, went back to that park and repaired that building and put in new walls and light fixtures and gathered around those kids and said, we still love you. We forgive you. We'll help you. Love of God. The love of God. Uncommon love of God. And finally, this one, a favorite. I took a youth group to Houston, Texas, and we worked among the very, very poor. And we were in 4 different groups in different apartment complexes, and so I would drop each group off in our big bus and then take my group to our place. Well, at our place, as pitiful as they all were, and there was a playground. It had no swings, just chains dangling. It was all just mess, just garbage everywhere. No child would ever play there. Broken glass, lots of things. Well, we went through the week, and on the last day, I had gotten my group into the bus, and they said, Susan, we have a request for you after you drop everybody off. And they had been talking about Walmart, and they had been talking about ice cream. They had been talking about going shopping, lots of things. So I thought, oh boy, here it comes. So we let everybody off, and when we got to our place, and they stayed in the bus, and they said, all right, Susan, we want you to do a favor for us. And I'm bracing myself for, let's go to Dairy Queen. And they said, how about if you would let us go in and get our money, we want you to take us to Walmart so that we can buy a new swing or two and get a bunch of trash bags and rubber gloves and anything, rakes and stuff, so we can get that playground cleaned up and worthy of children playing on it. They're spending money. They're astral world money. Love of God. Uncommon love of God. The ABCs, the Beatitudes, the real deal. May we be known for that kind of love. Amen. And I invite you now, as we turn to our hymn of invitation, if the Lord is leading you to make any public decision, come as we stand to sing that hymn. And if there's any prayer need that you would like to bring to me, I will turn off my microphone so that you can share if there's anything that you would just like to keep between you and I. Please come as we sing.